My name is Heather Merrill, and at 33, I finally learned what my own family thought I was worth. It happened at my brother's engagement party, in front of 60 guests. Nolan lifted his glass, looked right at me, and told the room I was faking it for sympathy. Then he reached down, grabbed the arms of my wheelchair, and pulled me onto the floor. My father stood over me and called me the family's biggest failure. My mother turned her face away, like the sight of me was something she had to survive. But here's what none of them knew. For 2 years, I had been quietly collecting the one thing they could never talk their way out of. None of us could have guessed that within 15 minutes, 5 officers would walk through those doors, and the whole room would go still. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women face impossible families and answer with steadiness instead of noise. If you believe the quiet ones are the people you should never underestimate, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up 2 years, to the version of me my family wanted everyone to believe in. I live alone now, in a one-story apartment about 25 minutes from the house I grew up in. Everything in it sits where I can reach it. I drive my own car, a sedan fitted with hand controls, and I work from my kitchen table doing legal research and probate paperwork for 2 small firms. I am a paralegal. That word matters later, so hold on to it. People hear wheelchair and they reach for a softer voice, and I've stopped correcting them, because correcting them takes energy I'd rather spend on the work. My family never reached for a softer voice. They reached for the phone, and when they called, it was usually to remind me not to make a thing of the past. Let's not drag it all back up, my mother would say, like the past was a body we'd buried together and agreed never to dig up. They called it a single-car accident. The report called it a single-car accident. The whole town called it that sad business with the Merrill girl who lost control on County Road 12. And every time I closed my eyes, I remembered headlights. Not my headlights. Headlights coming at me, high and wide, from a truck that was never in anyone's report. I'd press my palms flat against the cold aluminum of my armrests and try to hold the memory still long enough to trust it. My family had a word for that too. They called it confusion. I was starting to call it evidence. Here is the story everyone agreed on. 2 years ago, on a wet night in October, I was driving home from work when I lost control of my car and went off County Road 12. The car rolled. I spent 9 days in a coma. When I woke up, my spine was injured at the level of my chest, and the official account of my own accident had already been written, signed, and filed without me. By the time I could form a sentence, the crash report was a closed door. My father had spoken to the responding officer, who happened to play cards with him on Thursdays. My mother had told the hospital social worker that I'd always been a nervous driver. The narrative was set in concrete before I could lift my head off the pillow. I tried to tell them about the truck. I tried more than once. My brother Nolan would crouch beside my bed, take my hand, and say, in that warm voice he uses, "You hit your head pretty hard, Heth. There's no truck." And after enough months of that, after enough Thanksgivings where someone changed the subject the moment I said the word, the family found a cleaner way to handle me. They decided I wasn't confused. They decided I was performing. "She's just faking how bad it is," I heard my father tell my uncle once, in a kitchen, not quite quietly enough. Some people like the attention. I sat in the next room and listened to my own father turn my spine into a costume. I didn't say anything. I was already learning that the loudest thing I owned was paper. My father was Merrill Halling, and Merrill Halling was my father. He built it from one truck and a second mortgage when I was a baby. By the time I was grown, it was 11 rigs, a yard off the interstate, and the closest thing my father had to a soul. He used to say the company was the real family, and the rest of us were shareholders. Nolan was the heir. That was settled the way weather is settled, without a vote. My brother had spent the last few years getting his commercial license sorted so he could drive the long routes himself, then move up to running the dispatch board, then someday run the whole thing. And right around the time of my accident, the company had been chasing the biggest contract in its history, a regional distribution deal that would have doubled the fleet. My father wanted that contract the way other men want to be remembered. Anything that threatened the company threatened the only legacy he believed in. So when his daughter kept bringing up a truck that supposedly didn't exist, he didn't hear a wound. He heard a liability. He'd look at me across the dinner table and his jaw would set, and I knew he was running the numbers on me, the way he ran numbers on a load that didn't balance. In my family, the company always voted first, and the company had decided that what happened to me on County Road 12 was a closed account. I was the only line item that wouldn't reconcile. For 2 years, I let them think I'd given up trying. It's amazing what people tell you when they're sure you've stopped listening. The engagement came in the spring. Nolan proposed to Bree Calloway, a kind, slightly anxious schoolteacher who looked at my brother the way you look at a man you've decided to trust completely. The whole family lit up. Suddenly, there were menus and seating charts and a rented lodge out at Carlton Lake, and my mother had a project that wasn't pretending I was fine. I watched it happen from the edge, the way I watched most family things now, parked at the end of the table while the planning swirled past me. Nobody asked what I thought about the venue. Nobody asked if the lodge had a ramp, which it barely did. When I brought it up, my mother waved a hand. "We'll figure something out, honey. Don't make it complicated." I sat there with my palms on the cold aluminum of my armrests, and I kept my face even, because I had learned that my calm unsettled them more than my anger ever could. Then my mother said the thing she'd been holding for 2 years. She was folding napkins, not even looking at me, and she said, "We just want one happy thing. After everything you put this family through. After everything I put them through. I had gone through a windshield, and somehow I was the one who had put them through something." I didn't argue. Arguing was a door I'd stopped walking through. Instead, I went home that night, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened a letter that had come that week from my insurance company. It was a denial. And buried in that denial was the first crack of daylight I'd seen in 2 years. The insurance company had refused to cover a piece of equipment I needed, a better chair, and the denial letter said I could appeal. To appeal, the letter explained, I had the right to request my complete file. All of it. Medical records, billing, and any incident documentation connected to the claim. I read that paragraph 4 times. For 2 years, I'd been told the past was closed, off limits, none of my business. And here was a form letter from a faceless insurer reminding me that the records of my own body belonged to me. As a paralegal, I knew exactly how to ask and exactly who had to answer. The next morning, I started filing requests. I requested the hospital records. I requested the billing detail. And then, because something in me had never stopped seeing those headlights, I requested the responding agency's full incident file. Not the one-page summary my father's friend had handed around, but everything. Every attachment. I worded it the way I'd word it for a client, calm and specific and impossible to brush off. I didn't tell my family. There was no reason to. As far as they knew, I was a problem they had successfully filed away. An insurance denial had just handed me the one thing they never expected me to ask for. Paper. Real paper, with letterhead and signatures and dates. The kind of thing that doesn't change its story when a man with a card game on Thursdays asks it to. I dropped the requests in the mail, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something in my chest that wasn't grief. It was patience with a direction. It took about 3 weeks for my father to find out, because small towns leak. Someone at the county office mentioned to someone at church that the Merrill girl was pulling her accident file. By dinner that Sunday, my father knew. He didn't shout. My father almost never shouts. Shouting is for men who've lost control of the room. He just set down his fork, looked at me, and asked what I thought I was doing. "Appealing an insurance denial," I said. "That's all." "That's not all," he said. "You're digging." I told him I had a right to my own records. My mother jumped in, her voice climbing. "Why would you want to relive it? Why would you do that to yourself? To us?" And then my father said the sentence that became the drumbeat of the next 2 months, the one I'd hear in his voice, and my mother's and even my own head when I couldn't sleep. He leaned back, folded his hands, and said it quietly, like wisdom. Let it go. For the family. For the family. As if the family were a delicate thing I kept threatening, and not a wall that had been standing on my neck for 2 years. I looked at the people around that table, the people who'd signed papers about my body while I was unconscious, and I understood something clean and cold. They weren't asking me to heal. They were asking me to stay quiet. Those are not the same request. I said, okay. I said it gently, so they'd believe me. Then I drove home, 25 minutes through the dark, and checked my mailbox. The first envelope had arrived. I want to stop here for 1 second because I know some of you are watching this for a reason. Somebody in your life has told you to stop remembering something you know happened to you. If that's you, hear me. Write it down. Keep the paperwork. Don't argue with people who need you to be wrong, because you'll never win that argument and you don't have to. Comment the word remembered so I know you're out there. Now, back to that first envelope. It was the crash report, the full version, and I read it the way I read everything, slowly, with a pen. And the longer I read, the more I felt that old cold travel up my arms. Not because of what it said, because of what it didn't. There was no section ruling out a second vehicle. None. In a serious injury wreck, you'd expect the investigating officer to address it, to note skid patterns, debris, point of impact, and to write the words, "No evidence of a second vehicle," if that's what they believed. This report simply skipped it. And there was something else missing. The EMS run sheet, the report the ambulance crew fills out at the scene, the one that records exactly what they saw before anyone tidied the story, wasn't attached. A crash report and an EMS run sheet are two different documents, written by two different sets of hands. My father's Thursday night friend wrote one of them. The paramedics wrote the other. I sat at my kitchen table at midnight, looking at the gap where a second vehicle should have been ruled in or out, and I picked up my pen and wrote a new request. This time, for the ambulance crew's own words. Getting an EMS run sheet is not like ordering a pizza. There are privacy rules, custodians of records, request forms that have to go to exactly the right office, or they sit in a tray for a month. I knew all of this, which is the one place my family's low opinion of me had it backwards. They thought my job made me small and bookish. My job made me patient and precise. And patient and precise is exactly what you need to pull a thread out of a bureaucracy. So I filed correctly, I followed up weekly, and I waited. While I waited, I started asking around, carefully, the way you ask when you don't want a town to start talking. That's how I found Marion Voss. Marion had been an EMT for 19 years before she retired, and she'd worked the night shift the October I went off the road. I took her to coffee. I didn't lead her. I just asked what she remembered about a rollover on County Road, 12 autumns back. She stirred her coffee a long time. I remember it, she finally said. I remember thinking the damage didn't sit right for a car that just drifted off alone. I asked her what she meant. She shook her head slowly. Been a while, but something about the driver's side. I wrote it up. It'd be in the run sheet. There it was again. The run sheet. The document nobody had attached to my file. I thanked Marion, drove home, and that night I didn't press my palms to my armrests to steady a memory. I pressed them down because, for the first time, the memory was steadying me. Marion gave me one more name before we finished our coffee. There was an old fella who stopped that night, she said. Stood by the ditch the whole time. He kept telling the officer he'd seen a truck. His name was Walt Whitfield, and he was 81 now, sharp as a tack, and lonely in the way that made him glad I'd called. I went to see him on a Tuesday. He made me weak coffee and told me the whole thing without my asking twice. He'd been driving home from his sister's when he came over the rise on County Road 12 and saw a pickup stopped half on the shoulder, lights off, and my car upside down in the ditch beyond it. By the time he pulled over, the pickup was pulling away. Dark truck, he said. I got most of the plate, gave it to the young officer right there at the scene. He'd never heard another word about it. Nobody followed up. Nobody called. He'd assumed, like decent people do, that the police had handled it. I sat in Walt Whitfield's kitchen and felt 2 years of being called confused fall away from me like water off a roof. A man I'd never met had stood in a ditch and seen exactly what I'd seen. A truck. A real one, with a real plate, that someone had written down and someone else had made disappear. I asked Walt if he'd be willing to say all that again, on the record, to the right person. He set down his cup. "Young lady," he said, "I've been waiting 2 years for somebody to ask." My father found me at my apartment a week later. He never came to my apartment. The lack of stairs seemed to offend him. But there he was at my door, and he didn't sit. "You went to see Walt Whitfield," he said. The town had leaked again. I didn't deny it. I asked him why that bothered him so much, if there was nothing to find. That's when the real reason finally came out. The one underneath all the talk about healing and family. "Do you have any idea what a thing like this would do to the company?" he said. His voice was low and fast now. "We are this close to the distribution contract. This close. You start dragging the police back into a 2-year-old wreck, you put a cloud over the family name, and that contract walks. 11 drivers. Heather. Your cousin Pete's job. The whole yard." So that was it. That was the wall I'd been feeling on my neck for 2 years. Not grief, not even shame. A contract. My father looked at me like I was a load that wouldn't balance, and he said it one more time, the family drumbeat. Except now I could hear what it actually meant. Let it go. For the family. For the company, he meant. He'd just told me himself. I looked at my father, a man I had loved my whole life, and I felt the last soft thing in me go quiet and practical. He hadn't come to protect me. He'd come to protect a contract that was worth more to him than the truth about his daughter's spine. "Okay, Dad," I said, and I closed the door and I called the lawyer. My mother came alone, 2 days after my father did, and she was different. She didn't lead with the company. She didn't lead with anything. She sat on my couch with her purse in her lap like a woman in a waiting room, and for a while she just looked at her hands. "Some nights," she started, and then she stopped. She tried again. "Some nights I lie awake and she couldn't finish it. I watched my mother stand at the edge of the truth, lean toward it, and step back. I could have pushed. A harder woman would have pushed. But I've learned that you can see a person clearly and still let them keep their last bit of cover, not for their sake, for yours." "Mom," I said, "if there's something you know, you can tell me. Now or later, or never. But I'm going to find out either way." Her eyes came up, wet and frightened, and for 1 second I thought she'd say it. Then she pressed her lips together and reached for the old script. "Your father knows best how to protect us," she said. "He always has." She stood, smoothed her skirt, and let herself out. I didn't hate her. That's the part people don't expect. I looked at my mother choosing fear over her own daughter, and what I felt wasn't hate. It was a kind of grief for a woman who'd decided, a long time ago, that surviving my father meant never seeing too much. She knew something. I was sure of it now, and the fact that she couldn't say it out loud told me it was big enough to be worth saying. His name was Daniel Coleman, and he'd handled personal injury and accident cases for 30 years out of a modest office above a hardware store. I picked him because he wasn't flashy and because he listened to the whole thing without once looking at me the way my family did. When I finished, he was quiet a moment. "You've already done half my job," he said. "Most clients bring me a feeling. You brought me a witness and a missing document." Coleman explained what came next in plain terms. He'd send formal letters to the relevant parties telling them to preserve any records connected to the accident, so nothing could quietly disappear now that questions were being asked. He'd help me get the EMS run sheet pushed through. And depending on what it showed, he said, we'd talk about whether there was enough to ask the county to look at the case again. He was careful with his words. He never promised. He said, depending. He said, if. He said, we'll see what the paper says. I trusted him more for it. On my way out of his office, I took a wrong turn through the industrial strip on the south end of town, past a low cinder block building with two bay doors open. The smell hit me before I saw the sign. Fresh auto paint and primer and engine oil, sharp and chemical, rolling out of the open bays. Ostrander Auto Body. Dale Ostrander had been my father's friend for 40 years. I didn't think anything of it that day. I just noticed the smell, the way you notice a name you'll need later. I drove the rest of the way home with my windows down, and I'd stopped asking my family to believe me. I was building something that wouldn't need them to. The EMS run sheet arrived on a Thursday, in a thin envelope that weighed almost nothing and changed everything. A certified copy, stamped and signed. I made myself a cup of coffee before I opened it, because I knew that once I read it, I couldn't unread it, and I wanted one more ordinary minute first. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, slid out the pages, and read the paramedic's own words from the night I supposedly lost control all by myself. It was clinical and short and devastating. Under the scene narrative, the crew had written what they observed before anyone cleaned the story up. Paint transfer along the driver's side door and quarter panel, a color that wasn't my car's, inconsistent with a single vehicle rollover. And below that, a note about the debris field and the angle of the intrusion, the crumple pushed inward from the side, the way metal folds when something hits you, not when you drift off a road alone. The paramedic had even flagged it. Recommend investigation of possible second vehicle. There it was, in handwriting, certified, 2 years old. A second vehicle. Paint that wasn't mine, ground into the door beside where my body had been. I read it once. I read it again. I read it a third time. Slower. The way you press on a bruise to be sure it's real. My family had spent 2 years telling me I was confused, that there was no truck, that I was performing my own injury for attention. And the paramedics who pulled me out of that ditch had written, on the night it happened, that someone had hit me and driven away. I didn't reach for the phone, and I didn't fall apart. I sat very still with my palms flat on the table, and I said it out loud, just once, to the empty kitchen, almost a whisper. I'm not faking. There was a truck. Then I made a copy, locked the original in my files, and started looking for whose paint it was. Coleman moved fast once he saw the run sheet. A second vehicle changes everything, legally. It turns my sad solo accident into a hit and run with a victim in a wheelchair. And that is a very different file. The question was simple and terrible. Whose truck? I thought about Walt Whitfield's dark pickup and his partial plate. I thought about my father coming to my door fast and low, talking about contracts. And I thought about a cinder block building on the south end of town that smelled of fresh paint. Coleman knew how to ask the questions I couldn't ask without tipping anyone off. Body shops keep records. They have to, for parts and insurance and taxes, and those records leave a trail through suppliers and insurers that a patient investigator can follow. It took his investigator 2 weeks of careful work, but he came back with a copy of an invoice from Ostrander Auto Body, dated 3 days after my accident. Front left panel, fender, and a full repaint. The vehicle was a dark pickup. The owner of record was my brother, Nolan Merrill, and the job had been paid in cash, in full, the same day, by a man whose name was written in Dale Ostrander's own ledger, Raymond Merrill, my father. I sat with that invoice next to the run sheet and let the 2 pieces of paper finish the sentence my family had been refusing to let me say for 2 years. A truck hit me. My brother was driving it. And 3 days later, my father paid cash to erase the dent his son left in my spine. The smell from those open bay doors made sense now. They hadn't just repaired a truck. They'd repainted it. But it had never occurred to them to worry about my car. The wreck had been totaled and towed to a salvage yard on the county line, and it had sat there untouched for 2 years, the foreign paint still ground into the driver's door exactly where the paramedics had logged it. They'd sanded the proof